Welcome to the Faith-Focused Free Thinking Podcast, a ministry of Ozaki Congregational Church in Grafton, Wisconsin. This is our 15th episode, and we're glad you're with us. Hello, I'm Jeff Larson. Thanks so much for joining us here at the Faith-Focused Free Thinking Podcast. Today I want to answer a question I received related to the last episode, and then I want to answer a few other questions I've received in the past couple of years. Although to do so, I confess I'm going to read something else I wrote, even though I had said that last episode was one more thing I had written years ago. The thing I'm going to read today, though, I wrote more recently, so hopefully I will pause less in the middle of it to comment. The question I received related to last episode, though, was this. If God continues to work to bring salvation to people after they have died, where are they? Are they in a type of purgatory? It's a good question, and certainly an interesting one, and it brings up something I think it would be helpful for me to address. So, certainly, part of the church's role has been theology, that is, the study of God. And part of the church's role has been the interpretation of the scriptures, those writings that we believe to be the revelation of God to us in some way. We say here at OCC that we believe the Bible to be a source of God's revelation to us. It's not the only revelation, it's not the only source, but it's a source. And in it, we find something helpful. In it, we find a group of people as they attempt to make sense of life and God and themselves and the world. And I think that's helpful for us. But as the church interprets it, it attempts to better understand who we are and who God is, and maybe the details of the way that God works in the world, and maybe what is going to happen to us or to the world, or what happens after we die, all of that. And there are branches of study within the church. Soteriology, which is the study of salvation, pneumonology, the study of the Holy Spirit, Christology, the study of Christ. And there's this category called eschatology, which is the study of last things. And within that, you get people's interpretations of how things are going to play out. People's interpretations specifically of the book of Revelation, some of Jesus' teachings on the end times. You'll get what is known as premillennialism, amillennialism, postmillennialism, which are all different interpretations of a particular passage in the book of Revelation about 1,000 years and how we are to interpret that. And where people go when they die. Do they immediately go to be with God? They immediately go to heaven? Or is there some period between the time that people die now and the ultimate end of the world? And so people who die before the end of the world, well, where do they go? They go to some intermediate state that is not the new heaven and the new earth, but is a place for them to wait until that happens. And then in other traditions, like the Catholic tradition, you have a place known as Purgatory, which is a place that some people go who are not yet ready for heaven or the presence of God. It's not a place of damnation. Other people go to a place of damnation, hell. But this place called Purgatory is for certain people who need to be purified before they're ready to enter paradise or enter the presence of God. And obviously all of this, people have different opinions and interpretations and all of that. And at one time in my life, I was interested in kind of parsing all that out. I mean, you might have called me a dispensational pre-trib premillennialist, talking about how I thought it was all going to play out. Today, though, I find myself less concerned with all of that. And if I can even say it, I find myself sort of less interested in all of that. I mean, where do people go when they die, and when's the world going to end, and how's it going to end, and what is the calendar of events? I'm just not as worried about all of that, and maybe even, can I say, not as interested in it. So I guess my short answer to the question is I don't really know, and I'm not that worried about it. However, there would be some that would say, to try to answer that question specifically, they would say, well, yeah, maybe people go to hell, but it's not as though there's no redemption in hell, or that redemption is not possible from hell. God continues to pursue people, even people in hell, until he wins over even the most ardent rebel. And maybe you could summarize C.S. Lewis's position on hell in that way, just from his book, The Great Divorce. In The Great Divorce, C.S. Lewis sort of paints a picture of heaven and hell, and how heaven is sort of real, this reality, and hell is like, it's like this false reality. It's like not even real kind of thing. And yet he has this image of a bus that goes from heaven to hell and encourages people to get on the bus. And the bus goes back and brings people to heaven. And of course, some people in hell resist getting on the bus. They don't know. They're in this false reality and they can't understand what that heaven awaits kind of thing. But I think some people might say, or the way that I have thought of it sometimes is just, hey, whatever hell is and heaven is and all of that, I just think the bus keeps coming. God keeps coming, keeps pursuing, that salvation is always possible. And I just think that the only thing that is everlasting is the love of God. And eventually the love of God is going to win over even the most stubborn and defiant among us and eventually redeem everybody. So I suppose that's sort of my answer to that question. Again, I'm not that worried about it. I'm grateful for people that study the details and split theological hairs and think about these things. It's good. I guess I just find myself a little, if I can say it, sort of less interested in it. The other questions I want to answer I received about 3 years ago, and they relate to my journey and the shift in my faith and some particular aspects of theology. So the first one is this. When you found yourself experiencing a shift in your faith, did it shake you for a while? Did it make you question your whole faith? Did you ever feel you were sold a whole bill of goods? How was your faith impacted, and how did you still feel called to ministry? Here's my answer. I'm not sure I ever felt shaken in my faith by the shift in my faith, or that I ever felt like I was sold a bill of goods or had the wool pulled over my eyes, so to speak. I tell people that I experienced the very best of the evangelical tradition, from the faith and love of my parents and family, to the people who surrounded me in the various churches of which we were a part, to all who have been a part of my life in the evangelical tradition. I could not have asked for a better experience. I do look back with some regret, maybe, at some of the things that tradition produced in me. Perhaps regret is too strong a word. Maybe disappointment, or maybe a wishing that I had seen some of these things sooner. I found myself with a need to do something significant, or a need to prove my devotion to God, to be willing to sacrifice whatever it was in my service to the Lord, which resulted in some poor motivations and bad decisions along the way. As I reflect on my life, I feel like I lived under a blanket of, quote, make it to heaven and bring as many people with you as you can, which hung over every conversation, every interaction, and every relationship. Being free from that by the unconditional, unlimited, and unending love of God has been a good thing. Not that the blame lies only at the feet of the tradition, mind you. Many of my bad decisions were just my own selfishness. Life is a complicated and mixed bag, forcing me to reflect on myself as much as the traditions or circumstances of my life. Of course, no person or tradition is perfect, and I try to give grace to myself and to the religious traditions in my life. However, as I reflect on myself and on my life, I suppose I sense a little disappointment maybe, a little longing, a little wishing that I had done some things differently and that the traditions had done some things differently, even as I could not be more grateful for my upbringing. A mixed bag indeed. However, I never experienced being shaken in my faith by asking the question, what if none of this is true? As I evolve, I continue to find meaning and hope in the person and story of Jesus as I understand it or interpret it, without being worried by the question, is it true? By which I think we typically mean, Is it historically accurate? Or did it actually happen? I have felt shaken in my faith by the circumstances of life, particularly in the 2 years between leaving our church in Texas and coming to Wisconsin. I remember the "where are you, God" feeling. And I remember saying to Chandra, we have to believe God is with us. Otherwise, we're on our own. It's tough to convey in print the angst with which I said it. It was not a statement of strong faith, but a mere attempt at faith in the midst of the fog. And yet, at times the circumstances of life have given me a sense of God's presence rather than his absence. I say there are things in the world and in my life that I cannot explain better than to say that somehow God is involved, that somehow God is at work in the world in positive ways, even though there are so many things in the world we wish were different. I continue to believe, it continues to make the most sense to me, that the universe is here, that we are here because of an all-loving, all-powerful, all-knowing, personal, self-sacrificial God who is intimately involved in the world and from whom comes ultimate meaning and significance for all of us. And I see that God represented in my version of the person and story of Jesus. I suppose I would say I never felt called to ministry, or maybe I just couldn't grasp the idea of calling. I grew up with my dad telling me, if you can do anything else but the ministry and be happy, do anything else, which I took as good advice. But I just got to a point where I decided I wanted to be in ministry. I thought it seemed like the best use of my gifts and passions, and the people around me encouraged me in that direction. The circumstances in my life seemed to allow for it, and along the way I found it to be a great fit for me. Maybe it's my particular bent, but I say the greatest moments in my life, leaving aside the birth of my kids, my wedding, the joys of family, etc., are those when I'm able to be an encouragement to others, and when others are an encouragement to me. So today, though I no longer feel the need to save the world for eternity, I continue to find great joy in bringing a message of hope and peace to people in the midst of life. People live under such pressure. They feel the need to find themselves, to make something of themselves, to find their own worth, value, significance, identity, purpose, importance. And they receive a constant message from so many voices that they will find those things in what they do, or what they have, or what they achieve. If they have the right stuff, or arrive at the right position, or achieve the right status, or look the right way, or meet the right people, or earn enough, do enough, win enough, perform well enough, then they will be someone special. Then they will be valuable. Then they will be worthwhile. Then they will be loved. Or if they read their Bible enough, pray enough, share the gospel enough, serve enough, get their theology right enough, then they will be spiritual. Then they'll be a good Christian. Then the Lord will be pleased with them. I have lived under all of that. And so many people, most people, or maybe everyone, are living under all of that in one way or another, both inside and outside the church. I had lunch with a guy from our church before we left Texas, and in the course of the conversation, he commented, "What keeps me up at night is the thought, am I doing enough for the Lord?" In a similar vein, one church leader asked his 14-year-old daughter, "How does God feel about you?" And she responded, "I think he's probably pretty disappointed." I wish it seemed to me as though these were isolated individuals and not reflective of the feeling many people have within our churches. Yet, unfortunately, I think these feelings are all too common, and they're certainly feelings I have felt. So, it seems worth asking, what is it about what we are preaching and teaching in the church that is producing these types of responses? And what do we do about it? As part of the answer, I think what people within the church and within the world need to know is that there is a God who made them, loves them, and is in the throes of life with them, having solved for all of us the human problem of meaning and significance in the face of our own mortality. People need to know that their worth, value, and significance is not dependent on what they do, but has been given to them freely by the love of a God who knows what it's like to be them and who sacrificed himself on their behalf. This is what the person and story of Jesus represents to me. And that story allows me to live with greater hope and joy, with less pressure on my shoulders, with less anxiety and more peace. And this is what I hope for everyone, and I suppose is the reason I continue in ministry, that people would live with more hope and peace, with less pressure, with less anxiety, with more meaning and purpose, with less need to compare themselves to others, with less need to find their own significance by what they do, with more joy and freedom. It seems to me that the church needs to focus less on what people need to do or what people need to believe, and more on what God has done for us. For me, trusting in God's unending love for everyone has freed me in so many ways. Freed me from needing to believe it right, or do it right, or get my theology right. It has moved me out from under the blanket of making it to heaven and bringing as many people with me as I can, and has freed me to take a genuine interest in people, in who they are, in what is important to them, in what they think and feel, and how they make sense out of life. It has allowed me to learn from other people rather than just trying to get them to believe the right things so they can avoid damnation. It has allowed me to identify with other people rather than seeing myself as one who is, quote, in among everyone else who is, quote, lost. I can work to be a conduit of God's love and joy to others, and I can allow others to be a conduit of God's love and joy to me. Again, I could not be more grateful for my upbringing. The church and the people within it are doing things honestly, within their system of belief, doing their best, as we all are within whatever system we find ourselves. These are just my own reflections from my own experience, and I hope they are honest and helpful. The next question is Jesus part of the Trinity? Here's my response. The idea of the Trinity represents to me that God is inherently relational, which we see reflected in humanity. We are relational beings, made to be in relationship to one another and in relationship with God. Jesus, as part of a perfectly self-sufficient relational God existing in three persons, makes sense to me as a metaphoric way of understanding that which is ultimately ununderstandable. The next question is, did Jesus die and rise again? I feel like I've answered this question in a few different ways, and we've talked about it on some other episodes, but I'll read you my answer here. My answer is this. Certainly metaphorically, his, quote, resurrection has had a massive impact in the world. Jesus' death and resurrection are at least metaphors that give me hope for this life and for life in the face of death. What I'm not overly concerned about is whether or not Jesus died and rose again as events of world history. Not that I don't think there's evidence for that, although certainly people argue it both ways. But what I find myself unable to accept is that this all-loving God who knows what it's like to be us and who sacrificed himself on our behalf requires people to believe that Jesus actually historically died and rose again, and requires them to believe it to the tune of eternal torment in hell. The church's message on this seems to be that what God requires of people is to sift through all the evidence and be convinced of the historical truth of the resurrection of Jesus, or be damned forever. To me, a just God has not left us nearly enough evidence to hold people accountable to that extent, and a loving God who knows what it's like to be us knows that most people are too overwhelmed with the craziness of life to find the opportunity to even be exposed to, much less sift through, all the evidence. All the work people have done to convince the world of the historical truth of the resurrection is good and is helpful in creating a historic basis for faith in Jesus. The Case for Christ by Lee Strobel, Evidence That Demands a Verdict by Josh McDowell, Who Moved the Stone by Frank Morrison. But I just can't accept that this is what an all-loving God requires of people. Again, as metaphors, I find great hope in the death and resurrection of Jesus, and I think it's helpful that the person and story of Jesus is rooted in history. But I'm just not overly concerned about its historicity. The last question is this. What are your thoughts on rewards in heaven? Don't rewards in heaven have the potential for jealousy? Here's my answer. I guess I'd say I'm not really worried about rewards in heaven. I suppose I'm more concerned with doing what helps me and those around me to live with hope, joy, and peace in this life. I want to be a positive benefit to the world and to the people around me. I want to encourage people, build people up, represent the love of God to people, and allow other people to do the same for me. I want others and myself to increasingly live with less pressure on their shoulders, with a greater awareness of their worth and value because of God's love for them. I want to be a help to those in physical, spiritual, and emotional and material need, balancing feelings of joy, peace, and contentment alongside feelings of compassion for the world's suffering and a desire for justice in the face of the world's evil. And I suppose, if I'm honest, while I try to do all of that unselfishly, I confess that my motivation is an inevitable mixture, part selfless and part selfish. I have found life is best in the pursuit of hope and joy for everyone, and I follow that pursuit for my own hope and joy as much as for everyone else's. What each of us do in life as members of humanity is based on a host of factors: where and to whom we were born, what we experienced and learned, the passions that are innate or instilled within us, what we decide to do, and any evaluation of how well we have done with what we have been given is difficult to do, given that we're all starting from different spots. Life is balance, and hopefully all of us live in ways that help ourselves and those around us, within the host of factors that affect our ability to do so. The minute you add, quote, rewards in heaven into the mix, you end up with people feeling either enormous pressure to do something significant in order that God might be pleased with them, or with people feeling unfounded certainty that they are doing enough that God is pleased with them. Given the host of factors in my life, I have ended up, or you might say I have chosen, or the course of my life has led me, etc., along with most people, to a life that includes marriage and family. Because of my own choices amid the host of factors affecting my life, I live by the notion that the relationships with my family and the people around me are the most important things in life. However, there are some people who end up, or who choose, or the course of their life leads them, etc., giving themselves almost exclusively to fighting injustice in the world, or to spreading the gospel message, or to spreading whatever message they embrace, or to working on a particular issue. There are people like Mother Teresa or Gandhi, or the many people who worked with them or who have followed their examples. There are people like the guy who spent a significant portion of his life in prison in protest over the existence of nuclear weapons. There's a guy I just came across who spent 22 years digging a channel through a mountain in India to reduce the distance from his village to a larger center after he couldn't get help in time to save his wife. There are the people, amid the host of factors affecting their lives, who sell their homes and go live in the remotest parts of the world in service to God and humanity. And then there are the people born in those remotest places who live their whole lives within the same few miles radius. Billions of people who, like the rest of us, go to work, raise their families, involve themselves in their community, and try to be a positive part of humanity where they are. Who is God going to reward the most? And is that something about which we should be concerned? What if we sell our home, move to the jungle, and it doesn't work out? What if we sell all we have, go to the mission field, and become one of the countless people who leave the mission field over interpersonal conflict with other missionaries? There are innumerable scenarios that play out every day for all sorts of reasons. To what degree does personal responsibility deserve the credit or the blame? Certainly, we have to hold ourselves and other people accountable in the world. We have to reward and punish people in order to maintain order and avoid chaos. The threat of punishment and promise of reward are at times effective and appropriate motivations in this world. And the Bible's warnings and assurances are helpful inclusions, both of which we all need from time to time. But to attempt to hold people accountable from a divine perspective would require our own infinity. And so, it seems to me that where we're left again is doing not much more than casting ourselves on the love and grace of God and living with the uncertainty of life and faith and belief, while attempting to live in ways that lead to our own hope and joy and the hope and joy of those around us. To live, instead, thinking that our actions determine eternity's eventual punishment or eternity's eventual reward, seems only to add to life unneeded pressure or unfounded conceit. And as someone who has lived at times with the pressure and at other times with the conceit, I would say neither compares with the freedom I find through embracing the unending, unlimited, and unconditional love of God. As an aside, and as I've alluded to before, it certainly was not the case that my experience in a conservative evangelical environment had me only living in pressure or conceit. It seems worth the risk of overstatement to say again that the incredible people around me in that tradition represented the love of God so well that I experienced much hope and peace and assurance. Even as I reflect on that which I feel needs to be examined within the evangelical tradition, I am so grateful for my experience in it. And if I'm wrong, if God is going to greatly reward those who've done the most with the least and greatly punish those who've done the least with the most, then, as one of those who has received the most, I'm in deep trouble. If that's the case, I think we're all in deep trouble. But I can't believe that's who God is. I cannot believe it. We're not going to live in fear, trying to anticipate and prepare for the worst possible scenario we can envision, nor live in conceit, believing that somehow we are orchestrating our lives sufficiently so as to be the recipients of God's favor, while most of the rest of the world is not. The person and story of Jesus represents to me that God is love, that God understands what it's like to be us, and embracing the love of God revealed in the person of Jesus has given me both freedom from fear and also motivation to try to live in ways that lead to hope and joy for everyone. After writing what is above, I went back and read your question again and realized I did nothing to address your comments about jealousy. It's an important point. Along with living under pressure or with conceit, I have also lived with and experienced attitudes of jealousy or envy, more than I really care to admit. Again, it's a mixed bag, part my own selfishness, part tradition, part the culture in which we live, and the promise of rewards in heaven is certainly in the bag as well. For me, I have found the unending love of God to be a great source of peace for me in that regard. While at times I still feel the need to do something significant, or feel like I haven't done something as significant as others, or feel the need to compare myself to someone else and feel either superior or inferior, etc., etc., etc. Today I find a much greater freedom from those inclinations. I find myself free to rejoice in who I am and what I do, and to rejoice in who others are and what they do. I was just visiting with my brother the other day about this. He asked how we were enjoying the small town feel of living in Cedarburg, and I told him we were loving it. I said the slower pace, the community, all of it was really positive. As I reflected on it in the conversation, however, I said I think part of my enjoyment of it is tied up in the theological transitions of my life. In much of my experience in the evangelical culture, it seemed like bigger was better. Mega churches, national ministries, number of followers, number of people reached. It goes on. And I can think of a number of specific examples of the bigger is better attitude, both within myself and within the circles I was a part of, which certainly seems to breed jealousy. Working to be out of that mindset internally has been positive for me, and being out of that cultural mindset in many ways externally has made our experience in Cedarburg a great one. Small town, small church, slower pace, all has been great. Even as I now end up working to guard against my feelings of superiority at the humility of my newfound perspective in life. Try as we might, the perfect perspective or perfect mentality eludes us all. Again, I think most people are doing their best, including people within the evangelical culture. In that tradition, bigger is better. The goal is to get the whole world to accept Jesus. So the more people in church, the more people reached on the mission field, the more Bibles distributed, etc., the better. Of course, I think if we're honest, or if I'm to be honest, my pursuit of bigger is better within that tradition was as much about my own glory, significance, self-worth, and identity as it was about the number of people brought to Jesus. And yet, I still think people are doing their best within the tradition of which they are a part. Maybe even I was doing my best. And hopefully, I'm still doing my best. And maybe somehow all of that relates to rewards in heaven, and the reasons I would say I'm not really worried about them. So, that's it. That's the last question. That is episode 15. I hope it was helpful for you in some way. Again, the study of the details of theology, I'm glad that people do it and split theological hairs and all of that. But for me, I just find myself hopeful in the unending love of God for all of us, and I cling to that. So, as always, please don't hesitate to shoot me a note. I really appreciate hearing what you think or any questions you have. I hope you have a great November and Thanksgiving, and we will see you in December. Thanks so much for joining us.